they're saying that Jesus is the one who's destroying or threatening to destroy. And the thing that he is promising to destroy or threatening to destroy is the physical temple. So, but that is the charge that opens the trial. So now you have a trial. In other words, you have to accuse somebody of a crime. You can't just start a trial and then go fishing for a crime, but that's how it worked for the Jews. You had to start the trial by having witnesses come forward and testify to the same exact thing, and they do that. But notice that here we have the cleansing of the temple as a catalyst, as a direct catalyst for the arrest of Christ. And now that's what he is being charged with, threatening the temple. Now, why is this so significant? First of all, we know that any threat to the temple was taken very, very seriously. There was only one temple in the entire world, and that's the only place where animal sacrifice could be offered. It was very, very important. And it was a place that was considered by the Jews as a place where God literally dwelt among his people. The prophet Jeremiah was sentenced to death by the Jews, but for predicting the destruction of Solomon's temple. That's way back around the year 600 BC. Jeremiah was living in Jerusalem. He knew that the Babylonians had surrounded the city. He told the king to surrender to the Babylonians so that the temple would not be destroyed. And he's prophesied, and the king wouldn't listen to him. And he was thrown in prison, and he was beaten up. He suffered a lot for his prophecy. That's Jeremiah. That's the first temple. That's Solomon's temple. And they arrested him and sentenced him to death for predicting the destruction of the temple. And Christ actually had predicted the destruction of the temple, speaking to his disciples. But my point is that this is considered a very serious charge. And even if nobody thought he could physically do it, it was really a charge that in the past, historically, at least in the case of Jeremiah, was considered as warranting the death penalty. Now, Jeremiah was not put to death. Eventually, he was released. He was not put to death for that. Later, he was killed by the Jews, but not for that. So, but notice that this is definitely a charge and a serious charge. So let's go on to verse 62. And the high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" So he begins to question Jesus, because now he has been charged with something. That is, at least now the trial begins. So the questioning here begins. But Jesus was silent, it says in verse 63. And now the high priest is going to ask him if he is the Messiah, the Son of God. Now, why does that question, come out of the high priest's mouth? It's a very interesting question. You wouldn't see the connection between the temple, the threat to the temple that they believe Jesus posed, and the question, are you the Messiah? What do those two have together? Why doesn't the high priest say, do you have an army of men who are going to help you destroy the temple? Or what makes you think you have the right to destroy the temple? Notice that the question doesn't really seem related to the temple. Are you the Messiah? That's a very direct question. It's a very specific question. Are you the Messiah, the Son of the living God? Because that's what the high priest is about to ask him. Well, the reason why he asks about his identity as the Messiah is because there were prophecies that foretold that the Messiah would build another temple, a new temple. Of course, that was fulfilled. And what new temple did he build? He gave us his body. And the temple of Christ, the body of Christ, is what he would build. And that would become the means of sanctification for the world. Not this physical building or complex that stands in Jerusalem. They, of course, don't understand that. But they expected, and they knew, the prophet Zechariah said, the one who is called branch will build the temple to the Lord. Now, the word branch is referenced by Jeremiah and Isaiah as the Messiah, the stump of Jesse, the branch. So the term branch is a title for the Messiah. And Zechariah, the prophet, said hundreds of years before Christ, that branch, the Messiah, would build the new temple. So in their minds, this is a claim to be the Messiah if he's going to build a new temple. So that's why we have the next verse. Jesus was silent. He starts asking questions. Jesus doesn't say anything. Why is Jesus silent? Because there's no point in defending himself. He knows they're going to find him guilty. He's not going to participate in this sham of a trial. And by the way, in Luke's gospel, I think it's probably absolutely true that he said this. He says, they ask him, are you the Messiah? And he says, if I tell you, you won't believe me. So he's right. He's absolutely right not to engage because they're not going to believe him. They're really looking for a reason to condemn him. And they get it when he answers this next question. The high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. So it is after this that the Lord speaks. So why does the Lord speak? So I told you why he's asked about his identity. Because of the temple threat, the high priest says, I adjure you, exorcizo. Orcizo is the ordinary word for oath. I take an oath. Exorcizo was a formula, a specific formula. We see it it's in the Mishnah, it's in the Old Testament ones. It's not a common word. This is the only place in Matthew's gospel. Matthew being, of course, Jewish, writing for Jewish Christians, knowing the exact terminology that would have been used, gives us this terminology, exorcizo in Greek. I adjure you, I place you under oath. This is the formula that was used to compel someone to speak. So quite the opposite of what is the case, at least in American jurisprudence. In America, a person cannot be forced to testify against himself, cannot be forced to testify at all, and he can't be forced to incriminate himself. But that is not the case here. It's like the opposite of that. The high priest could force you to testify, even if what you said was against your own interests. And that's exactly what he's doing here. Now, why does Jesus respond to that when he was silent before? Because if he did not answer, he would be presumed guilty of the question that was being asked. And so he answers. And another reason why he answers is for the same reason that he will later, respond to Pilate or to Judas when Judas says, when Jesus announced his betrayal and the disciples start saying, is it me, Lord? Is it me? Is it me? Is it me? And he says, no, no, no. And Judas says, is it me, Rabbi? And Jesus says, you said so. So by saying that, which he's about to say to Caiaphas also, he's saying that the truth has just come out of your own mouth. It's not exactly a yes, but it's stronger than a yes. So the Lord will say, you said so. Si ipas, the same exact words he said to Judas. But it's more than a yes. Some people have said, oh, this is a neutral response. You said so. Or it's a negative response. I didn't say so. You said so. But that is not the case. We know from Judas, we know from how the Lord spoke to Pilate. This is kind of characteristic of the Lord. It's not exactly a yes, but he's indicating a yes in the strongest way possible. You cannot say that you don't know the truth because this testimony came out of your mouth. And this question came out of your mouth. What question came out of his mouth? Are you the Messiah, the Son of the living God? Now notice, that is the exact words of Peter when the Lord said to the disciples, who do people say that I am? They said, John the Baptist come alive again, or Jeremiah, one of the prophets. Then he said, who do you say that I am? And they're silent until Peter says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. So that statement, Jesus praises from Peter, right? It's a statement of who Christ truly is. And he says, Blessed are you, because flesh and blood has not revealed this to you. You didn't hear this from people. It is my Father in heaven who illuminated Peter's mind to understand who Jesus Christ really is. That's why Peter was blessed. Now the same exact thing has come out of the mouth of the high priest. So Jesus says, you said so, because it means that the high priest is testifying unwittingly to the truth of who Christ is. And he cannot say, we didn't know, because Jesus is about to affirm that, not in the you said so, but what he says afterwards. He comes out clearly and asserts his divinity. So if anyone ever says, and you may have heard people say this, Jesus never claimed to be God, that's ridiculous. He's put to death for claiming to be God. Just read the Gospels and it says that. And if you don't understand what he's saying, it's because you don't understand the scriptures. You don't understand Jewish, expressions. Because the Lord says this, you said so. This is verse 64 of Matthew 26. But I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. My goodness, what does that mean? Hereafter you will see the Son of Man. That's himself. He's referring to himself, and everybody knew that. That was a roundabout way to refer to yourself without saying I, but it was also a title that was used by Daniel when he had a vision of the Ancient of Days, God giving all of his authority to someone called the Son of Man in the Old Testament, called by Daniel in the Old Testament. He gives all this authority, and this person, the Son of Man, is seated at the right hand of God. That means that he is co-reigning with God, seated at the right hand of the power. Was understood, very well understood by the Jews. And it's in the Psalms. Sit at my right hand, and until I put thy enemies, make thine enemies thy footstool. That is a sign of co-rule. It's a sign of equality with God in this case. All right. So that's what Jesus is saying. First of all, he's identifying himself as the Son of Man, this time clearly referencing the vision of Daniel seated at the right hand of power. That was a euphemism. The Jews never use the word God. They say the power, the name, the mighty one of Israel, the Holy One, etc. So he's saying, you'll see me seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. And this again is an image of divinity. Clouds are associated with God in the Old Testament, and he's going to be coming. It is God who comes on the clouds. It's God who walks on the clouds, who's carried by the clouds, that kind of a thing. So clearly, this is a statement of absolute divinity, that he is claiming to be God. And of course, that's why he is condemned. And it's very ironic that Jesus is condemned for who he is, for stating clearly to the whole Sanhedrin who he really is. But here again, they cannot say we didn't know. He didn't come out and tell us. If he had told us, we would have believed him. How many times did they come to him and say, tell us plainly, are you the Messiah? Are you the Messiah? He didn't answer them because it wasn't the time. He knew that they would not accept it. They don't accept it here, but he knows he's going to be put to death anyhow. So he tells them directly who he is. He's the Messiah. He's the Son of God. So they can never say, we didn't know. We were in the dark. Just like Judas cannot say he didn't know who Christ was. Christ did not deny Judas anything. Judas was one of the 12. Judas saw everything, heard everything, knew everything that the others did, and still chose to betray Christ. So it's not out of ignorance that he did it. And neither is it out of ignorance that the Jewish leaders condemn him. They condemn him but listen, not for claiming to be the Messiah. Be careful about that. He's condemned to death for claiming to be the Son of God, because it's not against the law to claim to be the Messiah. Since the time of Christ, there have been other Jews who claimed to be the Messiah. Nobody put them to death. Okay, it's claiming divinity. That is the blasphemy here. So the high priest tore his robes and said, he has uttered blasphemy. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. Now, the robe of the high priest was seamless. It's very special, very expensive, very difficult to weave a seamless robe. And it is torn by the high priest. And by the way, he was forbidden from ever tearing his robes, even upon hearing about the death of one of his parents. So here he violates that law also. He tears his robes, and St. John Chrysostom says, he's completely correct in what he says, of course, that he tore his robes to add force to the accusation. And it's a very dramatic thing that happens. He says he has uttered blasphemy. So to make sure that they got the message, the blasphemy is a great offense against God. And of course, he says what the verdict is, and then says, oh, what is your verdict? Okay, what do you have to say? Why do we need witnesses? What is your judgment? Oh, yes, he's committed blasphemy. I don't think it would have gone any other way anyhow, even if he hadn't torn his robes. But just to show you that he's quite intent on making sure that Jesus is condemned to death, they all answer, of course, he deserves death. And they spat in his face and struck him. Now that he's been condemned, they begin to beat him. And he undergoes all kinds of indignities at their hands, which are mentioned to us quite often during Holy Week. Now, it doesn't end there. Of course, they decide that he needs to be put to death by crucifixion. Why is that? Why do they decide he needs to die by crucifixion? It's not because they technically couldn't put him to death. Legally, that is true, but I don't think they cared about legalities. Why do they want him to die by crucifixion? Because, first of all, Jesus is very popular. They don't want to be responsible for his death, even though everybody knew that they were responsible. Jesus is very popular among the people, so they don't want to be responsible for his death. But especially because, so they wanted the Romans to put him to death. It turns out to be a little bit more complicated than they thought, but especially because they want him and his message and his movement completely discredited. And that happens by having him die by crucifixion, because they could say that he was cursed by God. It says in the book of Deuteronomy, cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. And they don't just mean with a noose around your neck. Anybody who was crucified, crucifixion was considered a form of hanging. And this meant that God disapproved of you. God cursed you, because if something good happened to you, like you were wealthy or you were respected or you had a lot of children, that meant that God blessed you. It meant you were a good person. This is the mentality of the Old Testament, okay? And then if something bad happened to you, like you are poor or you have no children or you suffer some kind of calamity or some kind of illness, it means God is punishing you for something. God has cursed you. Well, there's nothing worse that can happen to you than be crucified. So that was the way they wanted to prove to people that Jesus was cursed by God and that God did not approve of him. In fact, God was punishing him in the worst way possible. And that plan really worked very well, because to this day, if you ask a Jewish person why they don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah, it's because he died on the cross. That is the number one reason. He cannot have been the Messiah because he died on the cross. Therefore, it's proof positive that he is cursed by God. So we're going to leave it there, and we're going to end with this lesson today. And I hope that you will attend all of the services of Great and Holy Week, and that God gives you a blessed Holy Week and a joyous resurrection. I'm Dr. Jeannie Constantinou for OCN.